Let's go to the next one. Why read Dostoevsky from a programmer's perspective? I thought this was really interesting because I suffer a lot of the same problems that this author suffers from, where I think in my kind of 22 to 24-year-old form was really convinced that the world can kind of just be broken down into purely scientific concepts. And broadly speaking, that's not untrue, because as we'll see later, that we are a part of a very complex system that is made up of simple systems that work, because complex systems in and of themselves don't work without simple systems that are propelling them. But it's interesting because this author in particular is focusing on human nature being a complex system that science hasn't really aptly defined. Just above, we were just talking about, for this Why Aren't Smart People Happier, for example, that these lines are exactly the same length, right? So that is a idea of just kind of oh, well, our perception of human nature would prevent us from really kind of appreciating the scientific fact that these things are actually the same length. So let's jump into what this author thought. Let's take a look at the source real quick to kind of get a good view of what we'll be kind of looking at here. So this blog post was great. It talks about fiction. It talks about the failure of models. It talks about when math doesn't work, human nature, and learning from the classics. So the real world is much, much more complex than our mathematical models can express. Confusing the models for reality, or Platonism, as he sometimes calls it, he being Nassim Taleb in this case, has caused many great failures in the world, from communist Russia's collapse to Marxism to the 2008 financial crisis. Basically, what's happening here is that it's really convenient to apply a quick one sentence piffy law to a very complex system, right? And sometimes the unfortunate but also fortunate part is that sometimes these laws work, right? Like occasionally these laws, like gravity or the planetary revolution. Hold on, let me see. So for example, this equation for planets, I don't want it there. I want it here. Here we go. This equation for orbits of celestial bodies is probably the better way of saying it. Works pretty much everywhere in the universe that we know of. It's actually very formative to our understanding of celestial bodies in general. You might have heard that in the past couple weeks, NASA hit a meteor with a satellite for the very first time, or they hit an asteroid. Pulled up a picture of that as well, which if you've seen the movie Don't Look Up, it's totally poggers. So this idea that we could use science to build a man-made device to run into a rock in space the size of Ohio with near 100% accuracy because we know we have these mathematical equations that predict orbits and where things will be in the future, gives us this kind of unfounded confidence when it comes to human nature type problems. So we take these really large, really simple things, like the Earth in and of itself as a system is a really simple object because it's just a giant rock where there's so much mass that everything is being shoved directly into the center, right? So because everything is just being kind of spear bombed directly into the center, we get a perfect sphere, or almost a perfect sphere, right? The Earth is kind of a little bit of an elliptical. So the problem is, though, that again, when he says the real world, he doesn't mean just the world of the Earth, right? Because as we just said, the Earth is actually very simple as an object. The real world includes everything that's on the Earth, right? So the complex nature of animals and how plants interact with, global warming and human dynamics and social kind of oh, can I say this to this person, but I can't say this to my boss, for example, right? So mathematical models really kind of fail to express this, which is one of the reasons that AI actually is now really starting to take the front stage, is because it is actually really good at this particular subproblem. We want to have a well-defined mathematical model for not well-defined things, in the sense that there are just so many variables, there's no way that one human could figure it out. So this equation was easy enough for a person like Newton to figure out by himself. I don't know if it was exactly this equation, but you get my point. It's a similar, I think it was F equals ma or something like that was Newton. The complex system of running FedEx or something like that, and getting mail to everybody on time, and also making sure that they're happy, and what happens when packages break, and what happens when there's a car accident on the road, and what do you do if one of the planes is out of gas, and what happens if a shipper doesn't screws over the thing that they were giving to their customer and they don't offer refunds. There's so many things that you can't really variables that you can't really just break it down into a calculation. So what AI models can do do is that they can actually break these things down into thousands of dimensions of vector dimensions. I'm trying to find an example. So we can break things down into a crazy large feature vector space and then use that crazy large feature vector space to solve these mathematical problems. But the author is also right, where there are just some models that are inherently paradoxical, right? Like there is a complete mismatch between how people actively kind of like think about the distance between certain problems that can't just be solved with just like a piffy kind of platonic answer. So what Nassim Taleb recommends is that people are more aplatonic, which is this idea of taking small cuts, this idea of being able to move with a problem in a way that you become anti kind of fragile, right? So I think that that tendency, especially for people who are like me, who are software engineers, who write a lot of code all the time, is that we're like, okay, I can come up with a problem. I can come up with a solution to this problem. It might not be the solution, but I can come up with a solution. So like that really fails though when people have to go to like social situations or something where there's almost infinite solutions and none of them are necessarily better or worse than the other. Like, should I move to Utah? It's like, I don't know what's in Utah. It's like, I don't know. What if I move to Siberia? Or what if I quit my job? What if I get another job? Like, what if I learn to do the hoedown? What if I like start a rap career tomorrow? Like, what if I get into, like, I don't know, literally anything, right? There's all these kind of multivariate equations that don't really have a solution that's really kind of quote unquote soluble, even though we might have a platonic kind of like, just eat your vegetables and it's all going to work out. It's like, okay, so what is it? And why is it not working out when you're not eating your vegetables? And what exactly about vegetables is the thing that causes it? So I think that this is just a really interesting kind of concept dealing with mathematical models and kind of overstating the value of mathematical models, but they are very valuable in a very universal sense. And I think that that is something that humans have to grapple with, is that we need to understand that math is very real, very valid, very helpful, that so good, in fact, that we can crash satellites into meteors, but we can't think that math is just the borderline solution to everything, especially when we don't have knowledge for a thing yet, right? Like if we don't have a concept of the moon being a rock and we think it's a god as a culture and as a society, someone actually needs to be a Galileo and get in front of everybody else and say like, the moon is a rock and I can prove it. And then you can also run the test to prove it yourself, right? That's the important caveat that a lot of people who do conspiracy theories don't follow up on. They're just like, oh, it's just because I said it is. So this next thing, that was until I started paying attention to the classics. Many people I had a lot of respect for, many of my heroes, insisted on the idea that it was not just useful, but very important to read the classics. Important, but why? Aren't they just very well-written entertainment? Wouldn't my time be better spent studying or practicing a useful skill other than, say, reading the monologues of Hamlet? What use could that have in the real world other than entertainment? I think about this a lot too. I'm definitely much more of a nonfiction kind of reader guy, but that definitely, I feel like, kneecaps me at times, because there is a lot of, I've for example, have finished a few books by Ursula K. Le Guin, specifically the Earthsea series. Pull up a picture of our boy Jed. I didn't know Studio Ghibli did it, Earthsea. I actually did know that, but I keep forgetting because I keep meaning to watch it, but now I'm never gonna watch it. So the kind of like tales in Earthsea are very human focused, right? Like fiction in general, because they're coming up with the world that isn't the real world. Authors have to really, I think, nail the relationships between their characters if they're really going to tell a good story. And I think the way of doing that is being able to really understand the human condition. And to be honest, I haven't read too many classics. That is one of those things that I need to start reading, and might be in a future installment of this very series where I will read some classics and discuss what I think about them. But this kind of like concept of like entertainment is really interesting, because it's, the overall premise of like reading or watching something, like watching a Twitch stream or watching a TikTok video, or, reading to me isn't just about entertainment. Reading is being entertained while also leveling up. It's a way to expand the current operating system that my mind runs on. And I don't think that falls under the condition of what entertainment is, which is to surprise and inspire. Like there's a lot of things that are just entertaining because they're just surprising or they're shocking, right? Like they're not really new. They don't really teach you anything. They don't really change your concept of anything, because they don't really take any work to engage with. I think that's probably another reason that the classics are really valuable, and like why people love them so much, is that you really need to spend some time with with them, and you need to read them really, really slow. You need to really kind of like understand that the reward from reading a classics won't happen immediately, and it won't be something that'll just be fed to you as just kind of like, again, not to socially like virtue or whatever signal, but like kind of like a grab bag of like what you'll see on most social media pages, right? Where it's just kind of like jump cut, jump cut, jump cut, jump cut, just to keep people's attention, right? Because the idea is that it's just like it's like a minimum viable product for capturing attention, as opposed to focusing on the end growth of the end consumer, I suppose. And books, just the way that books are formatted, forces you to engage with them because they don't move forward without you physically moving them forward. So I don't know. I think that adding more classics is really interesting, specifically in this next quote here, where he says, unlike scientific knowledge, Dostoevsky doesn't propose a model with a degree of accuracy and best practices on how to apply said model. Instead, he just narrates an archetypal story sprinkled with truths. I think that that's like, I half agree with this. I think that sprinkled with truths is kind of this shared concept that humans all experience at some point in their lives, right? Like this idea of like, oh, it's important to respect one's elders, and it's important to be good to your neighbors, and you know, do these things that are kind of like pro-social. Spend time out in nature, right? Spending time out in nature is a very common human well-being thing where you will be happier if you spend time outside, because we are a species that heavily values being able to have novelty and movement in a way where the brain is able to kind of like go into a more default mode state and enter a kind of slower brainwave kind of pattern. Meditation is thousands of years old for a reason, and the classics, I think, are so resilient because they really nail a lot of these concepts of like this shared human experience, whether that's the hero's journey of kind of like someone succeeding, or the pain of loss and the misery of grief and losing something or someone that you care about, the idea of succeeding in whatever dream you set out for yourself, or failing in whatever dream that you set out for yourself. So you can't really get that in a book about habits, right? Like a book about habits will be really good in teaching you how to be a better person habitually, right? Like it'll teach you how to focus on like things like making your bed and stuff like that. It'll teach you to solve these well-defined problems, but it won't necessarily teach you what it means to kind of like be alone, or like what it means to deal with loss. And kind of like, in a way, I think these classics can kind of, in fiction in general, can serve as kind of a pseudo parenting model where you can kind of get parented by these books, and they can teach you things that you didn't really necessarily, I guess, learn through your own upbringing.